Welcome to Capitalize Your Finances, the podcast that's your ultimate guide to mastering personal finances and unlocking the secrets of entrepreneurship. Each week, we dive into the world of personal finance and business development and have fascinating conversations with industry experts, seasoned entrepreneurs, and thought leaders who share their insights, strategies, and stories to help you get ahead in life. Whether you're a seasoned entrepreneur looking to scale your business or someone just starting out on your financial path, this podcast is your go-to resource for inspiration and actionable insights.
Welcome back to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Christopher A. Panayiotou, certified financial planning professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And on today's episode, I'm going to be giving you money advice for those in your 20s, 30s, and 40s. Now, before we get into the episode, as always, your free advice for the week. If, emphasis on if, you are going to compare yourself to anyone, compare yourself to those that, in your view, have been successful. There's nothing wrong. There is nothing wrong with cloning the best top traits from those that you look up to and admire. And I'd even go a step further. Get coffee with them, get lunch, go over to their house, ask them, without being a creep, obviously, ask them what they did in order to build their success and simply copy it. So now we got the free advice out of the week. It is time to get into the money advice for your 20s, 30s, and 40s. And I'm obviously going to start with the 20s. And what I wanted to do with this episode is I first wanted to see the 10 major issues that I see for each decade. And then I'm going to conclude each segment with the top 3 pieces of advice that I would give you if you are in that age bracket. So starting with the 20s, these are the 10 things that I see just about every 20-something-year-old is dealing with, in no particular order. The first one is student loan debt. And many of people in their 20s are graduating, whether it's from trade school, college, post-grad, you name it. And there is significant, in some cases, student loan debt. And managing monthly payments and choosing between repayment plans, figuring out the best interest rate and the different tranches of student loans, it can be really, really tough, and it can be overbearing. And not to mention, should you refinance if interest rates are changing? That student loan debt alone can really mentally, in some cases, just financially speaking, cripple people in their mid-20s or in their 20s in general. The second thing that I see people dealing with is low starting incomes. And entry-level jobs, they often come with entry-level salaries, some cases modest salaries, or moderate salaries, I should say, but most of the time you're starting at the bottom, the bottom of the barrel. And that's going to make budgeting and savings really, really difficult. And on top of all of that, raises and promotions or bonuses, they're going to be uncertain early in your career. And you got to think about it from an employer standpoint. Many of those in their 20s, if this is your first job, you haven't proven yourself yet. And so the employer is taking a risk already on getting you in the door. And all things being equal, you got to prove yourself before you get those big raises, promotions, bonuses, you name it. On the flip side of that, the good news with a lower salary or wage is you're not taxed as heavily, which we'll get into later on, but regardless of where you're at in your financial journey, there's always going to be a problem. But on the flip side, there is always a wonderful positive with that. And so by not making as much, not paying as much in tax, and being prudent with those lower tax dollars, you are going to pay yourself immense dividends later on in life if you plan accordingly with them. The third thing is budgeting and expense management, and learning to manage rent and utilities and food, transportation, all of these things that just get slapped upon us basically the second you graduate. Now, if you graduate from high school and you don't decide to go to post-grad or trade school and you just jump into the workforce, it's it's even worse off because you're that much younger. You're a teenager and suddenly you just have to adult. But for those of you that take the more elongated route and you suddenly get thrusted into the workforce after college or post grad, you name it, it's a lot. It's a lot to manage everything. And you think for the first month, man, now I'm making all this money. And then all the money goes out the door because you have to live. And developing a sustainable budget, we everyone knows how valuable that is, but actually going through it's a new and challenging process for a lot of people. And I totally get that. The fourth thing is building an emergency fund. And many people in their 20s have little to no savings. And there's a variety of reasons, but the fact of the matter is there's just not a lot there. And so getting to the proper emergency fund of 3 to 6 months, it's a major goal for a lot of people in their 20s, but it also competes with other goals that are extremely pressing, like paying off student loans, keeping up with a lifestyle. Forget living high and mighty, just having a lifestyle that is bearable. And then you may have personal loans or credit cards or figuring out your retirement plan. That can be extremely overbearing for people in their 20s, as well as just people in general. The fifth one I see is credit scores and credit card debt. And I want to caution you, establishing and maintaining a good credit score is a good thing. And it's crucial, but I don't want you to get too obsessed with it, because there comes a point once you get over, I would say 700, for sure 750, it doesn't really matter in the grand scheme of things, because there's always going to be some variability in your credit score bouncing up and down. And actually, not to fast forward too far in your life, but as you become more successful and you don't depend as much on credit due to your net worth growing, your credit score naturally is going to decrease. And it's kind of funny. I'm just going to speak for my practice. Some of our largest clients in terms of net worth, their credit score isn't all that great. Well, it doesn't really need to be. They'll just pay for it. So, but again, in your 20s, it's very valuable. Just don't become obsessed with it. And the obvious one, if you're misusing your credit card and you get too far ahead of your skis, it's going to lead to insanely high interest debt in long-term financial stress. And so make sure that you don't get to that point. The sixth is just lack of financial education. Many young adults, many just people in general, but especially young adults, were not taught anything in the in the realm of financial literacy when they were in college or high school, middle school, you name it. On the flip side of that, you are starting so early and you're starting at ground zero. So because of that, you can start to compound your knowledge in the right way, as opposed to those in 30s, 40s, in some cases 50s and 60s, where you have to unlearn years of incorrect education in the world of money. And what does that lead to? I mean, if you have a immense lack of financial education, that is going to lead to poor decisions about loans, savings, insurance, and the biggest one is taxes. The seventh thing I see is investing in retirement planning. In many people in their 20s don't start investing due to a number of reasons: lack of funds, fear, misunderstanding of markets, lack of awareness, and frankly, lack of caring. A lot of people in their 20s think that they're invincible and they're going to be here forever. And newsflash, you won't. And on the flip side of that, not really the flip side. On top of that, you think that, oh, I'll just start it later on. Well, I'll tell you what, the earlier you start, the better off you'll be. Compounding works in magnificent ways. And if you miss out on that early compound those early compounding returns, you're going to have to work that much harder to make up for it in retirement later on in life. Now, that does not mean that, like, for those of you that are entrepreneurially driven, or even if you're not entrepreneurially driven, but you're reinvesting a lot into your career, you may not be taking the traditional route of contributing to a retirement plan. However, you are reinvesting in yourself. You're just not going to see that return as immediately as those that take a more traditional route. But more often than not, you're going to be better off in the long run for doing so. The eighth thing I see is housing and rent affordability, and deciding whether to buy or rent a home. It's a huge issue for everyday Americans in their 20s, really in general, but specifically in their 20s. And especially in very expensive cities. And high rent can consume a disappropriate amount of your income. The ninth thing I see is health insurance and medical expenses. In young adults aging out of their parents' insurance. Granted, after the Affordable Care Act came about, it's up until age 26. But still, even after that point, when you go from being on your parents' medical to being on your own, granted, you're younger and generally healthier, and insurance companies know that you're younger and you're much more affordable than a family or your parents. Every dollar counts, and it hits you, and it can hit you really, really hard. Not to mention, even if you can afford it, there's a ton of confusion in the world of medical and just insurance in general. And God forbid you have an unexpected medical expense that can financially just kick you in the teeth for years to come. And then the last thing I see is lifestyle inflation, social pressure. It's not as bad for people in their 20s. Because again, if you're just starting out, forget lifestyle pressure. You're just trying to make it. And I get it. I mean, I was there. The desire to keep up with peers, or looking online at social media and seeing these influencers living high on the hog, even though they have no money to their name, but perception can be deceiving. It's going to lead to, and it leads to overspending in travel, clothing, dining out, experiences. I'm a millennial, and millennials are very much, we're going to live for the now. Well, what if you live for a really, 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 really long time? Because people are living longer due to people being more aware of their health, medical and research developments, enhancements. Society is getting better, things of that nature. So by doing that, you're going to wake up in your 40s and go, oh my gosh, I'm never going to be able to make this work. And I said it before, and I'll say it again. Social media can really exacerbate that pressure. And this sounds like a lot. And I know for some of you it is. And because of that, I want to give you the 3 pieces of advice to conquer your 20s in the world of personal finance. Number 1, make sure you are putting into your company's retirement plan at least your company match. The reason why I say that, it's free money. Whatever the match is, you want to put in at least that. So for example, let's say your company matches you dollar for dollar up to 4%, or 50 cents on the dollar up to 3%, or 25% up to, there's 25 cents up to 8%. Whatever that percentage number is, put at least that amount in, because that is free money. If it's 25 cents on the dollar, that's a 25% rate of return. If it's 50 cents on the dollar, that's a 50% rate of return. If it's a dollar for dollar match, that is a 100% guaranteed return on your investment. I cannot guarantee you, nor can anyone in the world of investing or planning, a 100% rate of return. So don't miss out on the free money. The second piece of advice, depending on your debt interest rates and tax bracket, you are going to want to either hammer out high interest rates with extra cash flow and avalanche those until you have debts at 6 to 8% or below, depending on your personal finance sophistication and comfort level. Then what you're going to want to do is you're going to want to take that extra cash flow and dump it back into your company's retirement plan. So if you are in a higher tax bracket, you are going to further decrease your tax burden. But if you are in a lower tax bracket, you are putting that money in after tax, but is going into your 401k or 403b or 457b, which generally that's what most people have. You're going to contribute to that Roth after tax. And the reason why I say 6 to 8%, long term, there's never been a 15-year period where rolling period since 1950, where long-term investments such as stocks, real estate, private equity, there's a multitude of investment options. We've talked about that in episodes past. They earn around 6 to 8%. And I would say, and I use that because it's depending on your comfort level as well as how conservative you want to be. And also you got to factor in taxes. So by paying off those debts that are above 8%, you got to think about it this way. You are guaranteeing a rate of return of whatever that interest rate is on the debt in which you are paying it off. The third piece of advice I'm going to give to those in their 20s is have 3 to 6 months of emergency fund set aside, depending on your circumstance. And there are a couple factors. If you're single and you don't have anyone else to depend on, or no one else is depending on you, and you've got a pretty cush job in terms of even if you broke your wrist or your ankle or you got in an accident, you could still do your job. Like it's administratively, it may be administratively cumbersome, but physically it's not that burdening on your body. You could probably get away with 3 months. If you have a family or you're the sole provider in your household, even if you don't have kids, and it's a very physical job, and if something happens to you, you could be out of income for months at a time. That's where 6 months is probably going to be most appropriate. So those are the 3 pieces of advice I would give to those in your 20s. Now, let's get into the 30s group. The 10 things I see 30s go through, people in their 30s. The first one is home ownership and mortgage debt. Many start thinking about or actively buying a home in their 30s and managing mortgage payments, down payments, even before that, but mortgage payments, property taxes, maintenance costs. That becomes key when it comes to financially focusing on how do I afford to the best of my abilities this newfound home or condo or townhouse. The second thing I see is starting or supporting a family. And I can tell you, I mean, with a 2.5-year-old and another one on the way, child-related expenses become a top financial priority, but they can also become extremely cumbersome. Childcare, healthcare, education, if you decide to go private. Maternity or paternity leave in reduced income during that period can really strain a familial budget. And I get it. And sometimes there's just not a lot you can do other than you get really good at saying no. The third thing I see is saving for retirement and really getting serious about saving for retirement. The pressure to catch up on retirement savings intensifies greatly in your 30s. Fun little fact though, most people don't even think about starting to save for their retirement until 46 was the last piece of research that I read. So, I mean, even if you are in your 30s and you feel like you have to catch up, you are ahead of most. That doesn't mean that you shouldn't continue to put that pressure on yourself to continue to rev the retirement engine. And so contributing to 401ks or IRAs or other investment accounts, it becomes more urgent. The fourth thing I see is career advancement and income growth. So again, in your 20s, you were grinding it out. You were trying to just make it. In your 30s, you start to see that hard work and that compounding of your goodwill. You're starting to see the money catch up to all of that, which is a fun time. And people in their 30s, they're often seeking out and earning raises, promotions, bonuses. Maybe they're making career advancements or career changes to boost their income. And some of you may even consider furthering your education in going back to school, or further reinvesting in certifications that will have positive financial implications down the road. But in the meantime, you start to feel that constraint financially because you are continuously reinvesting in yourself. The fifth thing I see is managing debts, and student loans are still around. Credit cards, auto loans. It's one of those things where new debts can start to add to the burden. Because again, if you're a newfound family and you're trying to figure out daycare, you're maybe needing a new car because your old car broke down or is breaking down and you don't want to drive in a ticking time bomb. These are things that people need to be aware of. Now, before we keep going, I'm going to take a quick commercial break. And then when we come back, we're going to keep grinding it out on what 30-year-olds need to know regarding money advice, as well as the biggest issues that I see y'all facing. So don't go anywhere. Stick around.
Are you ready to transform the way you approach sales? This episode is sponsored by the second book in the Capitalize series, Capitalize Your Sales, the all-in-one sales framework that saves you from ever struggling again and teaches you how to sell with sincerity, which dives deep into the art and science of driving sustainable growth. Packed with strategies that go beyond surface-level techniques, this book will help you understand what it takes to truly connect with clients, build long-term relationships, and close deals. Whether you're looking to fine-tune your sales craft or break through to the next level, Capitalize Your Sales offers a roadmap to success designed for today's fast-paced business world. Head on over to your favorite bookstore, order today, and start capitalizing your sales immediately. And now, back to the episode.
Welcome back to the show. We're going to get right back into the money advice, and we're talking about 30-year-olds, or those in your 30s. And the number six thing I see people in their 30s struggling with is rising lifestyle costs. So the good news is in your 30s, you start to compound your income a little bit more. But the bad news is the temptation to spend more, aka lifestyle inflation, comes into play. And that is a, fiscally speaking, very deadly sin. And you're going to need to manage your wants versus your needs, because that's going to become extremely important for long-term wealth building, not only for you, but to make sure that your family's taken care of as well, if you have a family. The seventh thing I see is the emergency fund and insurance costs. And very similar to 20s, building an emergency fund is important. However, it becomes that much more important when it's not just you anymore. If you are married with kiddos, it is going to be paramount that you are maintaining a prudent financial household, not only for yourself, but for your family. And with more responsibilities, there is a growing need for stronger safety nets. So you may need a larger emergency fund. You may need life insurance. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge on that one. Health and auto and home insurance will start to add up and start to gnaw at your monthly cash flow. And then the eighth thing I see, just to keep going down the family route, is education savings for children. Some parents start 529 plans or other education savings accounts. Balancing savings for your child's future versus your own retirement is a very common challenge that I see people making or in dealing with every single day. The ninth thing I see is estate planning. We're talking wills, powers of attorney, beneficiary designations. These start to really matter, especially when you have dependents. And it's often overlooked, but this becomes mission critical that you get your estate planning done or started in your 30s. And newsflash, once you have it done, it's never really done. I guess it's done when you're dead, but it's done, and then you're constantly retweaking because your life is going to change. It is going to change. So you need to consistently stay on top of things regarding your estate plan. And then the last thing I see those in their 30s deal with and struggle with is tax planning. And tax situations can become increasingly more complex when you have home ownership, when you have kids, when you have investments, maybe you have a side income where you're a contractor. Maybe you go and start your own business. I mean, God help you there. because then you have to figure out, should I be a sole proprietor, a partnership if you're in business with other partners? Should I be an S Corp, C Corp, LLC filing as an S Corp? There's all of these things that start to add up. So the top 3 tips I would give those in their 30s would be, number 1, make sure you focus on maxing out your retirement plan before you think about your kiddo accounts at all, if you have kids. And I know I get some pushback from people on this, and even existing clients, but I'll tell you, if you're trying to plan for your kids' future, specifically college or post-grad in general, they will be able to get help. Whether it's grants or scholarships or loans, they can get help. When you're in retirement, you don't get any help. So focus on your retirement first, and then anything left over, that's where you can start to look into helping your kids out. And there can be a balancing act. The second tip I would give for those in their 30s, keep your financial life as simple as possible for as long as possible. Far too often, I see the people in their 30s, I see this in my office all the time. They come in, they're starting to get some more freedom in their cash flow. And they think by having this freedom in cash flow, they need to get really creative on how to maximize the value within their net worth. And more often than not, most people are not maxing out their company retirement plan, which in the year 2025, it's $23,500 if you are under 50. If you're 50 or over, there is a $7,500 catch-up contribution in. So that means you could put in $31,000 if you're 50 or over. I know that's a lot of money, but the good news with that is, if you're not maxing out your company retirement plan, but you have this free cash flow, you just need to go back to your employer and increase your contribution limit, and you keep doing so until you are able to max that thing out. At that point, you could look into doing IRA contributions. If you don't get a deduction for an IRA, you could do a backdoor Roth IRA contribution, assuming you're making too much money to do a Roth IRA contribution directly. If you are married and your spouse is not maxing out his or her company retirement plan, but you are, then you need to start to look into maxing out his or her retirement plan contribution, and keep it that simple for as long as possible. The third piece of advice for those in your 30s, get a rough gauge on what you will need to have in retirement in terms of net worth. And this is very key, based on your monthly expenses that you have today. This is somehow not regularly recognized, and too many people think of a magic number in terms of having a successful retirement. The number itself means absolutely nothing. So if you say, man, I just need $2 million in retirement, why? Well, 2 million sounds good. That's not how you do it. A simple way to figure this out is you take your monthly expenses today, multiply it by 12, so then you get an annual expense amount. Take that number and inflate it by 3% over how many years you have between today and when you retire. And then you're going to want to divide that number by 4%. That is the rough lump sum that you will need when you retire. And I want to be crystal clear. That's a nice gauge, but the good news with that is you're probably not going to even need that much. And in some cases, significantly less than that, because that number does not account for Social Security income or pension income if you have any. And so if you really wanted to get specific on it, what you could do is you could do everything I said, get to whatever that number is on what you need for like a lump sum distribution. But you could also get to a point where when you get to retirement, so again, you take your monthly expenses today, multiply it by 12, inflate it by 3% between now and when you get to retirement. And then at that point, you could figure out what you're going to be getting from Social Security and your spouse, as well as a pension if you have it. Subtract that from that expense amount and then divide that number by 4, because then you're accounting for Social Security or securities, again, if you're married, and a pension if you have it. And last but not least, we're getting into the 40s. And this is where it starts to get a little wild because you've been at it for, well, let's face it, twice as long as those in your 20s, and you're really starting to see the compounding take effect. But there are issues that I see those in their 40s handling. And these are the top 10 things that I see as major concerns for this group. The first one is really not a shocker. It's retirement savings pressure. And with fewer years left, working years left, you're going to realize that, or many, I should say, realize that they're behind on the retirement savings. And that's where catch-up contributions to 401ks and IRAs become available. Again, starting at 50, but the planning for that starts to ramp up. And then people start asking, because it gets a lot more real, will I have enough to retire comfortably? The second thing I see is college tuition for kids, assuming you have kids. Saving and paying for children's college becomes a major focus. In balancing that with retirement goals, it's a huge financial tug of war. The third thing I see is peak earning years, but also peak expenses. And that's where I was hinting that in your 40s, it gets a little squirrely. Many of you in your 40s are in your highest earning years. And also that it's not totally true, because those in your 50s, it continues at that point. So 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, maybe starts to dip or you just retire. So even though you're in your highest earning years, at the same time, your expenses can be at their peak. Mortgage, children, aging parents, lifestyle, unnecessarily trying to keep up with the Joneses. All of these things start to add up. And the fourth thing I see, and I just mentioned it, but I need to re-mention it, is, or repeat it, caring for aging parents. This is the sandwich generation where you're financially supporting not only your kids, but you're financially supporting or caregiving in some cases for your aging parents. So while doing that, while also raising your kids, like that's a lot on your plate. That could include a number of things. That could include managing medical bills, assisted living, estate planning, in some cases becoming a power of attorney financially or medically for your parents or aunts or uncles or whoever you're taking care of. The fifth issue I see people dealing with in their 40s is the mortgage and other long-term debts. And you're still paying down a mortgage, but at that point, you may possibly have to refinance for cash flow purposes or lump sum purposes for paying for college or a debt, things of that nature. Or some people even consider speeding up and paying off their mortgage faster. And then you're also managing debts that we've mentioned earlier, auto loans, credit cards, second mortgages of a vacation home. Maybe you're putting a down payment on a car or a condo or a townhouse or whatever for your kids. Or maybe you're funding something for your parents. I mean, this all comes into play. The sixth issue I see those in their 40s dealing with is insurance and risk management. And you have to ensure at that point that you have proper coverage with life insurance, especially term policies. Those are the easiest ones. Disability insurance, and even things like long-term care planning. That begins to enter the conversation. All of these things, when it comes to insurance, the earlier the better, but a lot of people don't think about it until reality starts to slap them in the teeth. The third thing I see is healthcare cost and HSA planning. And Healthcare needs and costs tend to rise in your 40s, and they start to really take off in your 40s. If you are eligible, if a company that you work for offers this, a health savings account becomes an extremely valuable long-term tax strategy because you put the money in pre-tax. The money, if you're investing it, will grow tax deferred. And then if it goes toward qualified medical expenses, which there's a laundry list of them, it's tax-free. So by doing that, that is the triple whammy of tax planning when it comes to personal finance. Now, even if you put your money in and then you take it out immediately and it goes towards medical expenses, yeah, you didn't grow it, but again, you got the deduction today and you turn around, you take that money and it is distributed tax-free. All right, you got a little tax, you had some tax strategy there. Awesome, fantastic. And then the eighth thing I see is estate planning and wills and trusts and power of attorneys, beneficiaries. It becomes a necessity. It does not become optional. In your 30s, you can think about it. In your 40s, you've really got to buckle down on the estate planning side of things. And you also got to think about planning for asset transfers. If you've built up, if you have a home, if you have substantial net worth, even if you don't have substantial net worth, but you have some form of net worth, you need to think about, well, something happened to me. Who is this going to go to and how is it going to get there? And this should be obvious, but especially if you got kids. If you have kids and you haven't done any of this, you need to drop what you're doing, pause this episode, and call an estate planning attorney immediately. The ninth issue I see those in their 40s dealing with is tax efficiency. With higher income and investments in investment portfolios, tax planning becomes more complex and, all things being equal, that much more important. I've said this before many times in previous episodes, and I will repeat it. The greatest investment that you can guarantee is not an actual investment, it is the taxes you avoid. In your 40s, that becomes that much more paramount. So strategies like tax loss harvesting, Roth conversions, or charitable contributions, these are things that should be considered. And then the 10th and last thing I see those in their 40s dealing with is wealth building and preservation. Because in your 40s, what starts to happen is your focus shifts from just earning to growing and protecting the wealth that you have already began to compound, if you have done so. And this often includes things like diversifying your portfolio accordingly. Although I've talked about my opinions on diversification, there is value there. You need to manage risk. You need to optimize allocating your assets accordingly. I know that sounds really buzzwordy in I'm using a lot of industry jargon, but this is one of the rare exceptions where I'd say, I know I'm using the jargon, but you really do need to understand these things. So my top 3 tips for those in their 40s to close out this episode would be start to weigh the qualitative factors in your life. And I know I'm very much a quantitative guy. I mean, that's what we talk about. We talk about personal finance, investing, business, entrepreneurship, and sales on Capitalize Your Finances podcast. Up until now, financially speaking, you should be focused on the quantitative side of things to make sure you're doing the right things and getting that ball rolling. As you get older and as you can afford to do these things, make sure that you understand that once you quantitatively are on track for retirement, you can reassess qualitatively what brings you the most value. And sometimes that does not mean a black and white return on investment. It doesn't always mean financial. Other times it may be just taking your foot off the gas for a bit and recharging, because then you'll come back even stronger. The second piece of advice that I would give those in their 40s is, even though people say that as you get older, you need to dial back the risk, and I have talked ad nauseum in the past on how I despise what conventional risk means to people. In your 40s, yes, you're not in your earlier years, like your 20s or 30s. However, from a planning perspective, in many instances, your allocation should look basically the same as those in your as it was in your 20s and your 30s. You're going to have to trust me on this. Your future 60s-year-old self and beyond will thank you dearly for sticking to that same allocation. And the last piece of advice that I would give those in their 40s, if you have not done this yet, make sure you have a rock star financial team around you. That means you need to have a CPA or an enrolled agent, EA, in your back pocket from a tax standpoint. You need to have a quality estate planning attorney. You need to have a quality, an extremely quality certified financial planner. I've talked about this in the past. I actually think financial advising is going to be completely extinct in the next couple of years. You need to have a quality certified financial planner. Your certified financial planner should have the insurance conversation covered and everything that goes along with that. It may be a good idea to have an insurance expert in your corner, or your certified financial planner should have that. That's kind of up to you. If you run a business, all of that is still pertinent, but you're also going to need to have a quality business attorney in your corner, a life and health insurance professional, a property and casualty insurance specialist, especially if you, let's say you run a construction company and you have a bunch of equipment, you are going to need a quality property and casualty insurance agent to make sure that if something ever happened to all of your stuff, you are properly covered. And then the last thing you're going to need is a quality, a banker for things like, oh God, there's a litany. If you're trying to expand your business and you don't have anywhere else to go, you could go and get a loan from your banker. You can maybe refinance some of your loan and they could give you a more preferential rate. If you're trying to buy or sell a business, your banker might know someone in the industry and they can match you up without getting into the weeds of like a merger and acquisition specialist, because that's very, very niche. But the point is, once you have your solid team, that team is going to take all of the financial consolidation load off of your shoulders so you can focus on what you do best, which is living your life. So that does it for today's episode on money advice for your 20s, 30s, and 40s. For those of you that have been listening forever, you already know where to find me. For those of you that are new to the channel and in the brand, welcome to Capitalize Your Finances. As always, I'm your host, Chris Frey-Paniotu, certified financial planning professional, the Cap and Capitalize. You can find me in more ways than one. So until next time, keep capitalizing. Take care. As always, thank you for joining me today. If you have questions about today's episode or any personal finance questions, please reach out to me at Cap and Capitalize on Instagram, Chris at capitalizeyourfinances.com, or via our website, capitalizepodcast.com. If you want more Capitalize Your Finances content, head on over to capitalizepodcast.com and check out our blog, free resources, book, and online course. As always, I'm your host, Chris Frey-Paniotu, certified financial planning professional, the Cap and Capitalize. And until next time, keep capitalizing.
The information provided should not be considered specific tax, legal, or investment advice and is not specific to any individual's personal circumstances. Each taxpayer should seek independent advice from a tax professional based on his or her individual circumstances. These materials are provided for general information and educational purposes based upon publicly available information from sources believed to be reliable. The information in these materials may change at any time and without notice, and its accuracy cannot be guaranteed. There is no guarantee that any investment strategy will meet its stated objective. All investments involve risk, including potential loss of principal. Traditional IRA account owners have considerations to make before performing a Roth IRA conversion. These primarily include income tax consequences on the converted amount at the year of conversion, withdrawal limitations from a Roth IRA, and income limitations for future contributions to a Roth IRA. In addition, if you're required to take a required minimum distribution in the year you convert, you must do so before converting to a Roth IRA. IRA withdrawals will be taxed at ordinary income rates. Withdrawals prior to age 59.5 may also be subject to a 10% penalty tax. Roth IRA distributions of principal from a Roth IRA are tax-free. However, any earnings will be taxed at ordinary income rates, and a 10% penalty tax will apply if withdrawn prior to age 59.5 or within 5 years of the date the Roth IRA was established, whichever is longer. Your investment options are limited with the Roth 401k to those those offered by the plan administrator. Charges and fees may be incurred. 401k benefits may be subject to change at your employer, the governing pension, or benefit organization's discretion. Stock investing includes risk, including fluctuating prices and loss of principal. Earnings from a 529 college savings plan can grow tax-deferred and may be withdrawn free of federal taxes when used for qualified education expenses. Non-qualified withdrawals are subject to a 10% penalty tax. The information provided is based on current laws, which are subject to change at any time. Capitalize Your Finances is not affiliated with or endorsed by the Social Security Administration or any government agency. Social Security rules can be complex. For more information about Social Security benefits, visit the SSA website at ssa.gov or call 800-772-1213 to speak with an SSA representative. Long-term care coverage policies and provisions may not be available in all states. Approval may be subject to the terms and conditions of the insurance company. Insurance product guarantees are subject to the claims paying ability of the issuing insurance company and are subject to their terms and conditions. Diversification strategies do not ensure profit and cannot protect against losses in a declining market. Christopher Paniotu is a registered representative with and securities and advisory services offered through LPL Financial, a registered investment advisor, member FINRA SIPC. Capitalize Your Finances LLC is a separate entity from LPL Financial. Capitalize Your Finances is not registered as a broker-dealer or investment advisor. CRPS conferred by College for Financial Planning. LPL Financial, California Insurance License Number 0518721. LPLIA, California Insurance License Number 0B91442.